and it should be recording. Okay.
Hi everybody, it's Dr. Midgley from St Francis Hospice, just introducing how to write chart 1 of the MAAR chart suite for version 4. This is the as required or PRN subcutaneous injection sheet, and we're going to look at why complete it and how to complete it. With version 4, we have policy and guidance procedures, but very helpfully, the NHS London team have précised some key points of how to complete into a key points A4 sheet. It's probably going to be a bit difficult for you to read the detail, but basically on the left-hand side of the sheet, there is some information for authorisers. They give a website when you can look at some detailed clinical information to just help you with your symptom control suggestions and authorizations. Some really important governance issues to get right with these new charts. Please do not write a dash when you're doing a range. Write the word to, T-O, because there have been errors in authorisers not understanding the authorisation with a dash. So 5 to 10 milligrams rather than dash. They also very much want you to write milligram to milligram, so 5 milligrams to 10 milligrams, to make sure that there is no risk of the units being misinterpreted. Any dose less than 1 milligram must be written in micrograms. For example, alfentanil 500 micrograms to 1 milligram, or glycopronium similarly. And when you write the word microgram, you need to write it in full, because there's a risk of it being misread. So those are probably the key points on the key points. Okay. Moving on to why the chart, the sort of typical scenarios is that your patient is at risk of vomiting and they can't take oral medication reliably, so you need to make sure that there are drugs in the house just in case they need an antiemetic. It may be that they're experiencing episodes of pain which at times make them they're too distressed to manage oral medications, or the oral medication doesn't work, so they need to have just in case injectables. They may already be on a syringe pump and they need something for breakthrough and they can't manage oral breakthrough. And most often these charts start as just in case charts when you're writing them out in anticipation that this patient is now vulnerable to deterioration, to not managing the oral medication, and they are at risk of getting any of these symptoms and need something to keep them safe at home. So the top of the chart is fairly straightforward, it's self-explanatory. I'll just take you through. You now can mark if there's more than one as required chart in progress. You can also mark, and you must also mark if another community chart is in use, for example, for patches or for a syringe pump. You have the opportunity to write palliative care team contact details, and that's important because the person who's administrating the drugs may need some help if the patient is uncomfortable or they're worried about how many PRNs they're receiving. They need to have a go-to to ring. So please do populate that. You sign here on the top right-hand side, including your GMC, NMC or GPHC number. Please write allergies, including non-drug allergies. And if you know what the drug or non-drug does to them, it's helpful to have that marked. In this case, the person has an allergy to penicillins and they get a rash. Sign and date and print your name. If they are also using a transdermal patch for analgesia, please write the name of the patch and the dose. And here is the chart itself, and I'll try and expand it so you can see the drugs I've written. So just to do that right at the beginning, I've written this as a very conventional start to for somebody who might get pain, might get nausea and vomiting, might get agitated and distressed, and might develop respiratory secretions. Just going into some of the detail you need to authorise. So as well as the date and your signature, you need to provide a dose range. So most drugs you are able to write a dose range. The exception is some antiemetics. So we'll look at those dose ranges individually once I've shown you the wider chart. In terms of how often can you give the drug or the frequency, the blue arrow points to opioids and benzodiazepines. These can be given up to a maximum of 1 hourly, so as to avoid any risk of protracted suffering. You would normally be giving many doses of PRNs in a day without seeking advice and support, of course, but at the very least, the person on the scene can give a second dose as they're searching for advice and support if pain or distress is uncontrolled. Antiemetics and antisecretories, the normal frequency is 4 hourly max. And in terms of maximum 24-hour dose, the max has to make sense. It can't be an outrageous wild max, but it also can't be too small a maximum. And I'll expand that in a minute and talk you through each of the drugs. And just as a warning, you can't go on to page 2 of this MAAR's chart. If you spill over onto page 2, there are no demographics on page 2, so page 2 becomes useless. If you haven't enough space to authorise what you want to authorise, you must use a second chart. Just to go into each individual elements, range, frequency and maximum. So a standard start for morphine sulfate would be 2.5 milligrams to 5 milligrams. You see how I've written TO rather than a dash. The frequency 1 hourly max, and what I've done here is I've made my 24-hour max 6 times 2.5. And that is what our NELF guidance suggests that we do. It isn't unreasonable to put 30 milligrams, as in 5 milligrams times 6 max, but anything more than that is a bit wild, and you'd have to be asking why would you be giving so much in a 24-hour period? You would need to be revising this bit of the chart if the patient was needing so much. They might need a syringe pump. Just looking more closely at the antiemetic, I've chosen levomethomazine as a really useful broad spectrum antiemetic where I can provide a range. So I've provided a range, the 4 hourly max lockout and 25 milligrams as a max. Midazolam, back to very standard start doses, just as per opioid, with a frequency 1 hourly max, because we just seeing sustained distress is so difficult. But then what I've done is done 2.5 times 6, 15 milligrams max in 24 hours. And finally, glycopyrronium, that I can do a range. I've had to write micrograms because that's the dose, and I keep with my TO, 4 hourly max, and the maximum 24-hour dose for that drug is 1.2 milligrams. There may be complexity. So if your patient has poor renal function, you know they've got an eGFR of less than 30 or stage 4-5 renal failure, the convention is to prescribe oxycodone instead of morphine. And I've written a standard start range. The frequency would be 1 hourly, the maximum 24-hour dose, 10 milligrams in that case. If they're already on opioids, you'd have to refer to some guidance or seek some support as it's more complicated. If the patient has Parkinson's, they can't use most antiemetics because they're dopamine blockers. The one that we use for Parkinson's disease sufferers is cyclizine. I've written the standard dose. You notice I can't do a dose range because there isn't a dose range with cyclizine. It's 50 milligrams or nothing, but I have been able to write a frequency and a max 24-hour dose of 150 milligrams. And if you're not sure what to do, just seek advice. I've written our number there, but seek advice from a local palliative care team. Finally, the signature. There are two ways of ensuring a valid signature. One of them is to do a wet signature. Absolutely, useful. The key way forward if you're in the house with the patient, when you can complete the chart by hand, including wet signing the chart. You do need to make sure that you include your GMC, NMC or GPHC number on the top right, and to sign against each of the drugs that you are authorising. And then you can hand that original to the patient. It's in the house with them and it's valid. Alternatively, you can take it away with you, or you can write it at your surgery or district nurse base, but then you have to share it with people by scanning it in and emailing it. And the absolutely key thing here is that you need to be doing this from your own validated secure email, for example, nhs.net. Don't send it from a generic address because it won't be valid if you do that. It has to be from you to the recipients, which can be a group or a person. Please do CC in your own district nurse or practice base, because if there is a mistake, the recipient needs to come back to you and you may not be there anymore, so they need to be able to come back to a group for speedy correction. And then you should archive the original and just say that you scanned it and sent it to people. You can also now do an electronic signature. The only difference is that you're normally completing the MAAR chart from your base on a computer. You simply need to make sure that you write your name and your GMC, NMC or GPHC number in the top right hand, and also just to print and date on against each drug that you've authorised. And that is it. That is your electronic signature. And it can then go, but it must again be emailed from your own validated secure email, your own nhs.net account, not from a generic email. It goes to the recipient, but please CC in your practice or your district nurse base so that if there's a problem, the recipient can reply to all. And that is it. You've completed your chart 1.